I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Doug Jacoby, international teacher and author. Find out more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Doug, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rob. Good to be with you.
It's fantastic to have you on the program. It's been a long time since we talked. You were a huge inspiration for me when we lived in Japan in the 90s and the early 2000s. I remember going to at least one or two, I think two teaching conferences that you had initiated and hosted and organized in Athens, and then also in Paris, France, I believe, and one in England. It must have been three, I guess. And so just huge inspiration. And many of the things that you shared with me during that time still stick with me today. But let's go ahead and get into this right away. How'd you become a Christian?
I became a Christian through the outreach of a couple brothers. They were door knocking, and this was, I think, was my second day at Duke University. So I was very young. I had just turned 18, and I was seeking already. Yeah, I was doing a lot of reading and very eager. Back in those days, we just studied the Bible with people once a week. So once I asked them to study with me, it was 7 weeks because it was just one study a week. I probably could have become a Christian a lot faster. But yeah, I was a freshman or sophomore, I guess, technically. And seems like a long time ago. It was 48 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations. That's awesome.
So four dozen.
The Harvard of the South. Are you from the South originally, or where are you from?
Yeah. Well, at that time, I was living in the North. I was born in Florida. Jacksonville is my hometown. But my father was transferred to New Jersey. He was vice president with Prudential Insurance. And so when I started in third grade in New Jersey, that's where I finished school. And then Duke was my first college. But Duke was full of people from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. So it wasn't exactly like being in the South.
Okay. All right. So then how did you, let me, from that point, you became a Christian. I'm assuming there was a strong campus ministry there. You ended up in
Yes.
Boston. And so how did you end up there in Boston?
That's interesting. I certainly had no idea. I considered going to college in New England. My father seemed to like that idea, but I wanted to be farther away. But what happened was in the Lexington Church of Christ in 1979, Kip McKean moved there. One of the families of the church was the family of Doug Arthur. And he was a student at Duke. He's one of the two guys who knocked on the door with me. Gary Knutson, who started the church in South Africa, is the fellow who studied with me and baptized me. But through their influence, through the Gimple Arthur influence, Kip McKean, a very exciting ministry began. And Doug and a lot of the people in the campus ministry in North Carolina moved to Boston. Because I had sophomore standing, they encouraged me to come, but I wanted to finish my degree. I only had 1 year to go. So then I said I would consider it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, like a lot of people, no clear plan at that young age. I was only, 20. And I considered Tampa, I considered Gainesville. But the hottest thing happening, the most exciting church was Boston, what would become the Boston Church of Christ. So I made a decision to move there. Then the decision is what to do. I thought, okay, how about to get a master's degree? So I applied to Harvard Divinity School, and and that's how I ended up there. Um, I could have come a year earlier. During that last year at Duke, I kept getting reports from Boston of all the studies and baptisms, and it just sounded so exciting. I had a chance to visit with my then girlfriend early 1980, and in September 1980, I moved to Boston and was there for 2 academic years.
Getting your master's.
Yeah, I got
Okay,
a
so
Master of Theological Studies.
okay, okay, terrific. Can you give me just you've had a long career. Okay, since that time, can you just give me the 30,000 foot view of where you've been since that time, since those early days? I know you've been all over, but I think for my benefit and for those listening, it'd be great to hear where you've been since that time.
Right. Well, as you know, the vision of the Boston church was to plant churches globally, not just to begin campus ministries in North America. And London was the first planting. And when they asked me to go on the London team, I said no, partly because I thought missionaries should not be speaking their own language. Um, and but so many hundreds of people were actually hearing about the Boston church and were moving in. I realized I'm just, I'm just one of a very large number. And I was invited the next year to go, and I said yes. So I was on that London mission planting, moving to London in June 1982. I was a student. That basically was the core or the only student in the campus ministry. And I was there for 7 years with little time in Birmingham and Australia, but 7 years there. Then my wife and I moved to Sweden, and we took the helm for 3 years, working in Sweden, also Denmark and Finland. Then, with a vision of beginning a more concerted international teaching ministry, we moved to America. Well, I wanted to move to America. It seemed that was the best place, financially speaking. It was a lot harder for my wife to leave her country. Not that her country was Sweden, but she's British. So then we were in the U.S., working with different churches, but starting to do a lot of travel. You and I first met I guess it was in the 80s in Japan, unless we met before then. But there was a lot of international travel in the 80s, 90s. And then we ended up in Washington for almost 10 years, to Australia again briefly. Then, with the collapse or reorganization or redefinition of church in 0203, we lost our funding completely. So I ended up becoming an independent minister. And so I've been doing that for 22 years around the world. And most recently, we made a temporary move to Britain because we had one parent still alive, my wife's mother, and she was in good health. But we thought we're the most flexible. Let's move here. So we moved to Scotland for 3 years, and then even closer to her in northwest England. And the plan was to move for 5 years. And actually, in the fifth year, she passed away. We have a lot of commitments right now, but we're moving back to the US, actually to Atlanta, where we lived in that area probably 15 years. And so we'll be there in a matter of days. That
Okay,
maybe that's too
terrific.
fast, maybe that's too much. That
No, that's great. It's very helpful.
that's where we've been.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot more underneath the surface there, but that's okay. Caught you right in the beginning of a move to go back to the States and to Atlanta. How did you meet Vicky? How did you guys get together?
Well, she was one of the people whose door was knocked on in her dorm. Uh, Unlike me, she wasn't 18 at the time. She was in her third and final year of university. So she was 21. But so she was one of the early baptisms in the London church. We started in officially July the 4th. She was baptized in the following March. And we met the night before she was baptized. She'd been doing some studies, and on that, I met her after a women's semifinal basketball championship at Wembley. And yeah, so she came to church for the first time the next day, became a Christian that day. And I guess it was 12 days later, we had our first date. We took our time, 2.5 years, but we've been married 40 now. So, short answer, we met
Wow.
at a women's basketball game, but longer answer, through the campus ministry. She's one of the early ones to be baptized. And at that time, everyone thought I was a mature Christian because I've been a Christian 5 or 6 years. From our perspective now, Rob, isn't it humorous?
Oh
You know,
boy.
it's all relative. If everyone else is a 1 year old Christian, you've been around 5 years, then they look up to you. But I think the Lord measures our time serving Him in decades, not in years.
That's right. So, Vicky, was she a college basketball player
No, no,
when
no.
you
We
went
were
to?
just the church was watching because two of the people on the team were Christians, were members of the church.
Got it.
She
Okay.
was doing
Okay.
her first degree in occupational um, health and safety, and she ended up becoming an inspector of companies and workplaces, kitchens, all kinds of places. She was an inspector working for the British government for a couple of years before we married.
Okay. And then children. How many kids do you how many kids do you have and their
We
ages?
have three. Our son was born in London. Um, the second time we lived in London, let's see, it's we have see we're about to make our seventh international move. So
Oh boy.
I mean, it is a little crazy sounding. He was born there. Our daughter was born in Sweden, and then we actually decided to adopt a girl from China, and that we did in the mid '90s. And she's our baby. She'll be 32 in a few weeks, which makes me sound old, which may actually be true.
That's great. Okay. Terrific. So, Doug, when I think about your career, it's really impressive. I mean, there's just so much. You've got a huge website. There's just like stacks and stacks of material that you've produced. How'd you
Hmm.
get into teaching and writing? Okay, what led you
Ah,
into that? Because you were certainly a pioneer in our family of churches. You were one among two or three. I mean, I just can't remember too many other people writing at the time when I first, became a Christian during that time period.
yeah, interesting. The writing was the idea of James Lloyd and Doug Arthur. They said, what if we collect articles from different people who are coming for our summer program in London, and you could edit the book? Now, I'll tell you, editing a book with multiple authors is a lot harder than just writing one. But that was the very first one. I had never before even considered that. As far as teaching, I remember in Boston, I had a conversation once with Kip McKean, and he said, Doug, I see you more as a maybe a like a teacher, like a college professor, or maybe campus minister, than I do as a church leader. Now, later on, we did become church leaders for quite a few years, but he was actually right. At the time, I didn't like it. It sounded like, no, you can't really hack it, so you just be a teacher. But I think he was prescient in a way, and that is the direction things went. And it was because living in Europe, um, evangelistically, it's a very different world. Uh, Christian evidences are really important. Knowing something about world religions makes a huge difference. And so, just out of the needs of evangelism and connecting, I ended up doing a lot of studying, which and putting these studies together and teaching in the London church. So it was a process, but I had no idea that the kind of ministry I would end up in is. I had no idea that was on the way. So the current ministry is has 8 or 10 different components, from leading tours to the biblical world to doing podcasts to publishing, um, uh, academic conferences, networking with biblical scholars around the world. Just all kinds of things. It's very diverse and really interesting. And the 20 years on staff were very interesting. But during that time, I don't know. You could say I was very distracted, but I just developed more and more interests. And so since 2003, most of the stuff is stuff I was doing when I was on staff. Not all, fewer leaders meetings, but yeah, it's an amazing ministry. I never would have predicted. And I realized I could have gone just an academic route. Ended up being a university professor. Well, I know a lot of these professors. They say we wish we had the flexibility and freedom you do, but part of me longs. I wonder. I was at a crossroads. I could have gone in that direction of being a professor, and I didn't. But I appreciate their work, the hard work that those men and women do. So I'm making it seem even more complicated than it is, perhaps, but I'm actually leaving parts out.
Well, that's what's really interesting to me is you were really a trailblazer in terms of teaching. That just wasn't the thing back in the day. There was just seemed like there was no time to write, and yet you were producing so much material. I remember going to one of those teaching conferences, flying there, may have been in London, I can't remember, and you shared a poem about working upward in the night. I just said, "How do you do it?"
Oh, Longfellow, yeah,
And
yeah.
you quoted from Longfellow, and do you still remember that poem?
The heights, like heights by great men reached and kept, were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night.
That's right.
So that still
And
means a lot to me. That in the teaching ministry, a lot of the work that's done is invisible, and uh, in those earlier days, you couldn't just be a teacher. I mean, you had to be an evangelist first, and teacher had to be squeezed into the extra time, hence the toiling upward in the night. So,
yeah, absolutely. It hit me. I thought, okay, this guy is really calling me higher. Is challenging. It's like you're going to have to work as an evangelist during the day, and you're going to have to squeeze in study and writing all in the margins, and that's what you did, and it's very very impressive. When you look back on your career, Doug, what are you most proud of?
oh wow. I mean, I had another thought. If I just go back, I had a lot of support to be able to do what I did. Um, was largely because this was facilitated by those over me in the Lord, um, uh, principally Douglas Arthur. So I was allowed because the teacher ministry took more and more time, and once I was recognized as an international teaching minister, I about 80% of my work was in other countries, actually countries outside of our own regional group, what we call the British Commonwealth. And so having that understanding and freedom and even a budget to travel was very unusual. And other teachers just simply didn't have that. So you asked me, what am I proud of? I'm not totally sure about that. If you ask me in 10 years, I think I can give you a clear answer because I'll really be looking back on the career, hopefully still lucidly looking back on the career. But I mean, I'm proud of the many of the brothers and sisters who my ministry is able to sponsor to attend events, conferences around the world, and Christian leaders and professors, not necessarily even in the churches of Christ, meet these brothers and sisters, and they're so impressed. So I'm very proud of people that I've been investing in, others have been investing in. Um, maybe some of the books, perhaps that, but I'm not really sure. No one's ever asked me this question before, Rob.
Well, I think it's a important question, and you've got a lot to be proud of. How many books have you written?
I've written, it's 35 or 36.
Wow,
Um,
that's amazing.
at this point, I mean, some books are new. Like this year, okay, this year I wrote three books, but two of them are new editions. One, the Genesis book I did with the apologist Paul Copan, on Genesis 1 to 11 is coming out in new version. Then there's the collection of prayers, Amen and Amen. This is a second edition, although it's got a lot more material. Done a lot of radio interviews on this collection of prayers. This is a book I'm proud of. I think this will outlast me. It's a collection of prayers from the last 3,000 years, which can, I don't know, inspire us, stimulate us. So, yeah, I keep writing, but I I have 10 kind of not academic goals. That's just area one, but 10 broad life goals. But one of those sub goals is to write 0 to 1 books a year. That may sound funny, but there have been years where there have been 2 or 3, quite a few, and of making many books, there's no end, right?
Mhm.
Ecclesiastes 12, and much study wearies the body. And so I had a year recently where I wrote no books. And to me, that's actually a victory because what's much more important than writing books is relationships. I don't know, the idea of the second mountain in David Brooks's book, first mountain earlier in life, your achievements. In my case, it would be maybe things I've written or projects I've taken part in, becoming financially stable. The second mountain is focused on other people. It's relational. It's what's really important, not those accomplishments, laurels, or things you might hang on the wall, but it's people, especially family, but people. This is all that really counts in the end. So
Yeah.
that's been a shift that a perspective I've gone through in the last 2 years. Actually, since I began doing resiliency training, which is another part of my life, really focusing on what's important. You got me going, Rob. I've got all these
I know.
ideas.
Okay. Can resiliency training? Tell me about that.
Well, it's a real buzzword of late, but resiliency, literally means being able to bounce back. But it's going through times of hardship, challenge, or disruption, but maintaining a high level of effectiveness and quality of life. And that ability, resilience is a muscle. That ability it's huge. It means we can weather the storm. We don't give up. We stay upbeat. We see new possibilities. We're better connected to others. And I benefited from a program last year. This year, I'm co-teaching a cohort and also continue to be a student. But this has been very, very helpful to me. Resiliency focuses more on our strengths than on our weaknesses. So yes, we compensate for weaknesses, but think of, I don't want to call it classical discipling because probably classical discipling would be Jesus and the 12. But the way I was taught and the way I thought very naturally was that in discipling, we need to deal with our weak areas. We need to change because they're not good. And there's a different way to approach helping people, and that's to focus on their strengths. And yeah, of course, we end up addressing weaknesses along the way, but by focusing on what we're good at, maybe those gifts that God has given us, there's less judgment. There's a lot more encouragement, and I think respect, if I can put it that
Right.
way.
It makes me think of Nassim Taleb and his book, The Black Swan. In his many books,
What a
he talks
book,
about
yeah.
being anti-fragile. Is there a connection
Yes,
between that?
yes, I think so. Yeah, I would say there's definitely a connection. And in resiliency training, end up reading a lot of great books like The Obstacle is the Way, or Do Hard Things, or Strength to Strength by Brooks, not this Brooks, or Second Mountain by David Brooks. But yeah, I've read 2 of Nassim Taleb's books, and they're great um, because they make you think.
They
Um,
do. He's got an attitude. He's got a
Yeah,
story.
it makes you.
Doesn't like economists. That's for sure. I can tell you that. In any case,
That's true.
let,
He very fair.
let me just go back because you're the difficulty in this conversation is you've done so much. It's difficult to maintain a focus. Why don't we do it by decade? When you go back to the 80s, what's the biggest lesson you learned from your time in London and then on to Sweden? Like what stands out to you about that decade?
Yeah, because I didn't necessarily learn the lessons at the time. Often they become clear a few decades after, as our perspective change. So in the 80s, it was I could be part of um, global evangelism. This works. We can start new churches. We will do well. We will grow. I mean, that's a huge confidence builder. So um, becoming an evangelist, which was the first appointment outside the United States, was a huge confidence builder. In the 80s, I married. We had our own ideas about ministry, so we ended up leaving the UK and moving to Scandinavia. And for my wife, those were the best years ever. I think those Scandinavian years. Do you want me to keep going? The 90s?
Yeah, let's talk about the 90s, especially with you starting a teaching ministry and starting to pull people in as you pulled me in. You know, if you could just kind of encapsulate that decade, getting started with your teaching ministry.
Yeah, I realized with I don't normally write down my personal thoughts, although I do with the resiliency training. One of the men encouraged me to journal, so I do write down a couple sentences every day. But before 2024, I wouldn't write more than a few sentences a decade. But I do remember writing in 1992 in a journal that many men will become evangelists. Uh, Fewer will become elders. Uh, but teachers, at least the way we understood it at the time, I thought perhaps even fewer. And if I can do that, then surely that's the place to focus. But in the system we had to be a church leader and doing that with my global visions, aspirations, would it really work? So we realized we needed to move to the States. And I became increasingly, let's say, concerned, certainly by 94, if not before, with the lack of biblical training for our men and women worldwide. It wasn't that we didn't use the Bible, but actually training. So I had a vision of what we called a ministry teaching program, and that developed after more than after a decade. That morphed into what we called AIM, Athens Institute of Ministry. And the idea was not to establish a program that everyone in the world would be part of, but it was more to create a template and give some inspiration. So right now, I mean, in our family of churches, there are certainly at least 20 programs. Some connect with each other, some not, but they all have something in common. So that's actually something I'm proud of, to be able to pioneer in that area. But I was very concerned. I still am. Now, by the late 90s, some brothers and sisters were realizing I need some continuing education. And in the 2000s, more and more were getting Bible degrees, or some kind of qualification. We still have far to go. I think the vast majority think they don't need it. They don't understand how desperately they need that. But probably now more than ever, we have men and women enrolled in doing, especially master's degrees, some doctorates, some are bachelor's level. So, yeah, I was very concerned, and I think we've done a lot of things right. We've done a lot of things wrong that we could have avoided with some better theology, with some better training.
Right. Well, I remember you during the 80s, that was a constant refrain that
Mm.
there needs to be deeper teaching, there needs to be deeper knowledge, that um, people perish for lack of knowledge and different things like that. I remember you kept on talking about that and sounding the alarm. I think people
Yeah.
listen. I think over time, I certainly did. Definitely, I think there was a movement toward that, but I think there was also kind of a strong Methodist revival style, lay preacher, just preach the word and just, use the first principles, which is
And Rob, it
effective.
wasn't just a, a lack of support for theological training. Even though we did well with a lot of our campus ministries, there was a lack of support just for education. I think we capitulated to an anti-intellectual strain. Many people were sent out not having finished their degrees or very close to finishing them, and then that was dropped. And I think it's because the principal leader of the movement himself had a negative experience with seminary. And so whatever suspicion we had as conservative Christians or in the Church of Christ was probably increased even more. No, we not only do we not need to go to Bible college or, we do not want to go. We think these are not good places to send people. I think the attitude has changed a lot, but there was a lot of reactionary um, thinking in the 80s and 90s, which is unfortunate.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the first decade of this millennium. So, or this century, the the aughts, 2000 to 2010. Talk a little bit about going independent. That's a huge step. How did you do that? How did you navigate that? Becoming essentially a bivocational minister.
And it was nothing I had ever planned on. It's not like there was a master plan. We we had moved to Australia in late '02. It's our second time living there, believing that the funding would work out, and it didn't. But we moved in part because we knew things were going to collapse in '03, which is what they did. It was the writing was on the wall. So that itself was a very independent kind of move. We lived there that time for 88 days. And I remember our administrator, Jim Blau, called and said, well, if you resign, we have enough money to move your family to whichever country you're going to live in. If you wait too much longer, I'm not sure we'll even have that. So we had to decide UK, my wife is British, or US. And we really felt like Abraham, leaving home, being a wandering Aramean. I didn't know what I would do, but I thought easier to get a job in the U.S. and maybe I can become a Latin and Greek teacher in a private school. That was my idea. And yet, very soon after we moved back, we started getting requests to come help here, come help there. And of course, I would never charged money before for my work, and I hardly charge at all now because things are very solid. But in '03, '04, '05, it was a new way of thinking. And my financial advisor said, you need to charge and you need to be careful not to undercharge. Otherwise, you'll never be able to support your family. So that was in the, um, so that takes us up to '03, '04. Did you want to go farther or?
Yeah, tell me about that. Like, how did you make it? How did you make ends meet? I mean, that must have been a scary time for you. I mean, you
It was
already had a number
exciting.
of books at that point, but tell me, you've got kids that are younger.
Yeah,
You've got
all in
kids
school.
all in school, so that's pressure cooker time period.
Well,
Can you describe
I
that?
know you understand it. I think we talked about this a bit when I came and visited you in Boise, during your
You've
Idaho
got a
period
good
before
memory
you
of
went to
North
Oregon,
Carolina. That's right.
the Rogue Valley Church, Ashland. Is it Ashland or Ash something?
You have a photographic memory, Doug. That's
No, no,
dangerous.
no, no. But yeah, we really didn't know what we would do. And it's at that point, churches in our model of compensation were not setting people up for retirement. Retirement donations were minimal. Um, something like, if I recall, $100 a month, but only starting when you were 35 years old, which was like, wow. So, and there was really no chance to save.
Right.
So, and I and hundreds, actually thousands of people who worked for churches globally were in that same position. But I think one reason we landed on our feet is that in the previous years, particularly the previous decade or so, um, we were really well connected with brothers and sisters around the world and had taught in many of those churches. And so there was already a network and there was a trust. And without that, I don't really know what would have happened. Yeah, it was a very exciting time. It's not a time that I necessarily would want to go through again, but it's a combination of inspiration and disillusionment, of joy and disappointment. Um, Realizing that if we're not going to have a very strict hierarchy of control globally, we're not going to all be able to go in the same direction. There are going to be differences, which sadly, some differences will separate us, will divide us. And having to accept that and get over it, that was an adjustment.
Right. Right. Well, I'm sure also with the rise of the internet, that was happening during that time period. That must have
Yeah.
been very helpful because all of a sudden you've got a global reach. You built a massive platform with your website and your teaching ministry. So those, and plus you're incredibly smart. I think I remember, spending time with you when you would come and visit us in Tokyo and talking with you. I'd be asking you questions and I'd be thinking to myself, I think Doug is multitasking while he's talking to me. He's while he's talking to me, he's also like coming up with his latest book. It just seems like there's a
But it was
uh,
never that way, Rob. I'm sorry if I gave that impression, but I've always had multiple interests, at the same time.
Oh yes, I know absolutely. I just remember thinking this guy's got a lot of brain power going on upstairs, that's for sure. Okay. So then let's talk about the next decade. You were in Atlanta most of that time, I'm assuming, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
we ended up moving. We left Australia. We ended up. My brother said, "You can stay with us." We moved to Ohio, and the kids finished up school year, which is pretty amazing because they'd been in the Southern Hemisphere, where it's a very different time sequence. And then a friend, there were certain confidants, or people I would talk to at that time. Uh, yeah, I would say Sam Lang, Gordon Ferguson, Tom Jones, Mike Tolliver, Scott Green. Might have been five of them. There were a few others, but Sam Lang said that he was going to move to Athens, Georgia, and he had a friend, Greg Garcia. Uh, these both became Christians in Gainesville, in Florida, in the '60s and '70s. And they said, we'll be not too far from you. I think they were going to be in Kentucky. Maybe you want to consider this. So I drove down and talked to the two of them and then talked to my wife on the phone. We decided, never having visited there, to move to Athens, Georgia.
Wow.
So we live right off of Hog Mountain Road. So after all these years living in cities, yeah, it was something. Some days you could smell the manure. One day I got up and there were 7 cows in our yard grazing on our lawn. Uh, that was a different world. So we were there for a couple of years, but then we moved into Atlanta. There was a group that wanted us, and there was a new church. It wasn't totally new because there was quite a number of people who started it. We started a church that was called the North River Church of Christ. That was in 2005, and we were there in part of that leadership group up until 2020 when we returned to UK. So yeah,
So you were part of the North River Church from 2005 to 2020.
yeah,
They
from the
returned
beginning,
you
from the inception
with
until
Tom Brown.
yes, Tom ended up moving there. not that long after we were there. I guess it was within the year. Uh, so, so that's
So was that like
Georgia.
a breakoff church? Was that like part of all the former Atlanta Church of Christ and then just different splinters that came after 2003?
It was something, it was really something new. In '03, there were 9 or 10, I guess you could call regions that kind of all became independent churches, uh, different combinations and recombinations. Right now, I'm not even sure what the total is. It might be 7 or 8. But this would have been, I guess they called it the East Cobb Ministry back then. But we were starting something new, and it was very encouraging, very very exciting, particularly, I'd say '05, uh, '05 to 2010. Once the when a church becomes 500 members or 1,000, and at its zenith it was 1,200, it's a very different animal. It's a lot easier to get your arm around it and to connect emotionally when you're 50 or 100 people or 150.
Exactly.
1,000
Exactly.
is it's getting hard. So
Okay, so you were there for that period of time, and then in
mm,
2020 you wanted to go back and be with Vicky's mom, and you were
for
there for
family
over
reasons, moved back to the
for family
UK.
reasons.
So
Back to
came
the
to
UK.
Scotland.
Where are you currently living now?
Well, we don't live too far from Scotland, and we live in northwest England. So it's Lancaster is probably the town that people might be familiar with, but not the one in Pennsylvania. And that's walking distance from us. We live right on a bay off of the Irish Sea, and we're probably an hour's drive from the Scottish border, something like
And this
that.
is where
Maybe.
Vicky grew up. This is nearby where she was
No,
raised.
she actually grew up more in the London area, but it's where her mother ended up moving when she lost her husband back in the '80s. And so she was living in the Lake District, which many would consider is the most beautiful part of Britain. And we could have moved there, except that's kind of expensive. So we lived just half an hour from where her mother lived and died.
Okay. And so for the past 5 years, you've just continued. What have you been doing? And has Vicky been working? What have you been up to?
Well, Vicky's she's she's always supported me, and I couldn't do what I do without her. In a sense, not working. I mean, if she had a regular full-time job, um, I think it would be too much. So we do have a ministry together we call Fair Havens. We do a lot of uh, work around the UK and Europe. Sometimes, though, I was actually usually on the longer trip, she won't come. Now, we did teach together in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles church a few weeks ago. Right before that, I was in Mexico City, which was fantastic. But she wasn't there for that. We were together in Atlanta. I was in Boston. She came up to Boston more for the fellowship. And then back to Atlanta. I stayed a whole week. Then we both flew together back to the UK. 2 days later, I headed to East Africa. I just got back from Kenya and Burundi. So, yeah, she doesn't always travel with me. And as far as locally, so I guess what I'm saying is my ministry could be based anywhere in the world because I do stuff all over the world. And if I'm not traveling, as long as I have a computer, like you, Rob, if you have your computer, that is your office. You could be anywhere. So we've done as much as we could in the UK, wherever we've been welcome, and we've tried to be stimulating and encouraging. Like this is a Saturday. Tomorrow will be with one of the UK churches. There's a function, and I guess I've taught twice and preached and taught in London in the last couple of months. But we're about 5 hours away from London.
Okay.
Anyway,
So I understand. Okay. So So I know you're busy. It must be tough for you to not be at a hub. That must add a lot when you have to drive so far to get to an airport.
Yeah,
When you
Edinburgh, the airport was 18 minutes away. Here,
I see.
it's closer to an hour and a half, and but you compensate. Most people in the world don't live 18 minutes from an airport, and they wouldn't want
Exactly.
to.
Exactly. Okay. So like what's the nature of you've got this ministry, you've built a huge network of relationships all over the world. What's
Hmm.
the nature of your relationship like with the ICOC, International Churches of Christ, around the world? Is it as it always has been? Is it changed over time?
I'd say it's changed some. I would say that in most of the work that I do is with the ICOC. Not all. For example, if I'm leading tours, we've always had people from other denominations joining. Academically, I have colleagues from different faith traditions, but it's mainly ICOC. And it's mainly a very positive relationship. Um, at this point, I don't know how much you're aware, but there's a lot of how would you put it? There are factions. There's rumors, gossip, slander, uh, and I think when we were all one and there was stricter control, I'm not in favor of high control. I'm actually in favor of low control. But if people had attitudes, or if people didn't like you, they would almost be forced to confront that, and you would get together and have meetings. So we do have some people who don't like us and don't like other teachers that they view as too independent. And I could name the people. So there are parts of the world where I guess we wouldn't be welcome. But it's really because of direct opposition from people I would call interlopers. They should mind their own business. But in nearly all the churches, we're very welcome and appreciated. And I maintain a massive correspondence, written and phone and personal visits with people all over the ICOCs. So this is the spiritual family. Did I say anything that needs clarification there, Rob?
No, I think that's it. I appreciate you sharing that because I think that is a reality of after 2003, there was a shakedown, basically a massive breakdown of the superstructure.
Yeah,
And in one way, it was awesome because it enabled me to go plant a church in my hometown, which probably never would have happened had there been
right.
like a superstructure. I don't know how to an administrative structure guiding future direction. So it offered opportunity for innovation and advancement in the kingdom of God in a more organic way. But on the other side, I see in our family of churches there you're right, there's more gossip, there's more talk. I try to stay out of it. I try to avoid it. But
Mm.
what are you seeing? Like when you take a look at our family of churches, what's your evaluation?
Well, if I'm even qualified to offer an evaluation, I think we've taken autonomy too far. I mean, autonomy is a quality of an adult. I mean, we should be autonomous in that we feed ourselves and make our own decisions. Um, but of course, there's that balance between dependence, excessive dependence, and independence. I think the pendulum's gone too far towards autonomy. It may even be worse than I realize. Um, I feel extremely connected to the brotherhood, but as I travel, I realize how few people are connected. How many churches are they're kind of on their own, or maybe they have one other church they connect with, but they're in a kind of a backwater. So my evaluation, anyone who says that globally it's all bad news. That's someone who's not being fair, probably doesn't have all the info. Anyone who's glowing with a positive report. Oh, yeah, we're doing great globally. I don't think that person has traveled very much or really listened. It really depends where you are. And as you know, Rob, even in a single church, there can be people who are happy as clams and other people who think it's, a toxic culture. And that may be true, even in one group, because, each house church or basic unit has a different flavor, sometimes even a different theology. So it's to generalize is hard, but and I don't want to base it all on the numbers. My suspicion is that we're not growing globally, and our theologies will make it very hard to grow. So that may sound like a concerning judgment, but I think that's true. There are exceptions or places where there is a lot of
Right.
growth, and I mean numerical growth, but in most places, nah, that's really not the case at all.
Right. That's it's difficult to come to grips with that because you want the kingdom to be growing across the board, and that's love you. I'm sure as I we love the churches, we love the family, the brotherhood, but at the same time, there's the reality of it always seems like there's problems. There always have been problems, and
Yeah.
have there are problems now. It makes you rely on God. I kind of wonder that God sets it up that way. Just problems create dependence on God for sure. But let
And
me just let's
yeah,
do a little thought experiment, Doug.
okay.
Let's just say you got appointed king of the kingdom. Okay, you are the prince of the kingdom here, and you could wave a magic wand and make it exactly like you wanted, and you were in charge of the family of churches for the next 5 years. What would you do? Where would you guide it?
Well, first thing I'd do would be to resign. You're asking what would be the second thing I would do? I mean, if you ask,
Maybe,
you know,
maybe I should call it prince or the president of the kingdom. Okay, let's just say you got voted in, and you were the 5 year
well,
president of the ICOC family
that
of
is
churches.
not a job I would want any more than being president of a country. Um,
Right.
I mean, God is the King of Kings. I mean, God,
Okay.
God's
Okay.
kingdom has
I'm glad
always
you
been
said that.
here, and He could have, almost you could say, well, God, what could you do so that we would all be healthy? And well, He's not going to reply, I could force you, because that would be counterproductive. So, I mean, to affirm the right of every congregation to be independent in a healthy way, that's certainly one thing I would emphasize. But also would emphasize the importance of connection. And I think part of this is, from my perspective as a teacher, it's a lack of humility. We have this view that we can't really learn from other groups, sometimes not even if they're in the restoration movement, even if we share the same DNA. There's this attitude, history is dull. We have nothing to learn from history. Why study church history? Which I think is incredibly arrogant. And then even the unwillingness to learn from the world. Now, this has been changing. We'll bring in outsiders with expertise in a field to speak to our groups or to our congregations when appropriate. But even that it's a little bit of a new thought for a lot of people. Okay, I was recently visiting a church where they had clearly been taught you shouldn't read any book that's not been published by the ICOC. To you who likes Black Swan, and I'm sure you've read hundreds of books in your life or thousands, that seems like just a crazy thought, but this thinking is still there. So it's the idea that we're the only show in town. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. We've got to do it. We've got to be in charge. We don't need to learn from history. We can jump from 33 AD almost to the present and skip over all those, centuries. We don't need continuing education. A lot of our leaders, they don't have theological education, but even if they do, they think, I don't really need any more. which I think is so wrong. So I would really encourage people to to look outward and to network broadly and to keep learning. Stay connected. I had Rob. I don't know if this is of use or not. I remember a conversation I had with Al Baird, who was like international elder. I guess this was in '03. We had so many conversations face to face and on the phone from the mid to late '90s onward. And I said, maybe all we need is to pay a secretary 1/4 time to maintain a directory of churches. And if people say we want to be in that directory, we simply collect their information, and maybe they just pay, their congregation pays $100 a year, or it'll be enough to, to cover the salary and business expenses. And maybe that's all we need to be connected. Maybe that wasn't enough, but I can see that might have been an improvement over what developed.
Right. That's the tricky part, Doug, because what I hear you saying is maintaining independence and the freedom that comes with that, which I think has value, but at the same time, cooperation and working together.
Yeah.
You've talked about there's a lack of humility. There needs to be more humility and
Mm.
an emphasis on continuing education, getting deeper spiritually in the Bible, and in relying on the benefits of history and outside reading, even secular reading, other denominations.
Mhm.
But how? Give me some practicals. Give me some bullet points. This is the rub. Okay, this is the challenging part. This is why you're the president of the ICOC for the next 5 years. How would you practically put that in? Because you've got people that are really, they're still stuck in 2003. I mean, they are just like, don't talk to me, don't tell me anything. You know, oh boy, that sounds like accountability. Oh my gosh, that's just control. You're trying to control me. And then you've got people that are like, hey, let's go back and have a lot more involvement in each other's lives, so that you've got a broad spectrum of people.
Yeah.
How could you practically synthesize that?
I'm not qualified to answer. I mean, I can share principles, I can give illustrations. Let me offer if your audience uh, of the Rob Skinner podcast are mainly in North America, they'll appreciate this. The Americans didn't like being pushed around. The colonists, originally, of course, they were completely dependent on the countries that established those colonies, right? Whether France or Spain or Britain, but in time they became confident and didn't like being pushed around. And so after the Revolutionary War, they were determined, we don't not going to have a monarchy. This was one reason you have the right to bear arms, so that local militias would make sure that no one invaded them and pushed them around. And they were leery of central government, of control. And so the first draft was, well, it was the Articles of Confederation. So the states had a lot of power. The federal government was very weak. And it really didn't work great. Although it sounded good, I think. We're confederated, like Switzerland, which is a confederation of cantons, as they call them. There's no president in Switzerland. No one can tell you who the president is, because it's more like they rotate the chairmanship of the six or seven parts of Switzerland. In the U.S., that it didn't go so well. So then you had the Constitution. The Constitution gave a lot more power to the federal government, not taking it away from the states, but the federal government was strong. But you had the checks and balances with the judiciary, the executive branch, and of course the legislative branch. And I think we are still in the Articles of Confederation phase. We're still sensitive. We don't want a King George III or any other king or queen telling us what to do. And we've not yet, if we're going to have an international structure and government, we're going to need something more like the Constitution, with separation of powers and with checks and balances. Does this take you back to your school days, Rob?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So I think that's, you know, what you can't push people around. You can't tell them what to do. But I've always strongly supported the right of each church to make its own decisions. And so I think if a church is smart, if they're hiring men and women on staff, they should have some strict requirements. It shouldn't just be, oh, this brother's very inspiring, or, she's wise or pretty. It's got to be a lot more than that. But we can't make a list of criteria or qualifications for the whole world. I mean, not even for one country, let alone the whole world, because every culture is different. And we'd be going way beyond scripture because the Bible doesn't give us answers on these things. And so when we say, well, this is what we should do, we have to be really careful that we don't confuse biblical principles with our own traditions or our own inspired common sense. So that may disappoint you and some people listening that, I don't know. Here's what I would do if I were king of the world.
I was hoping for 3 bullet points, okay, 3 action steps, but that's okay. We can just go ahead and
Well,
leave
that's
it
one of the
rest right
bullet
there.
points, Rob, is that we we're going to have different views on how this works. I
Yes.
mean, take some of the contentious issues right now, like the women's role, which has been under heavy discussion um, for a couple of decades. We've been talking about that one since probably 1990. We've been talking about that. We're not all going to agree on this.
Since you brought it up, can you give me a 30-second summary of your view on the women's role in the church?
Well, 30 plus years ago, someone asked me about this because I was one who was advocating, women should be permitted to serve the communion. I mean, come on, and pray and baptize. And at that time, most people felt good about that. I said, what I think is more important than whether you ever have a woman preaching or a female elder, or, there are a lot of ways we could put this. More important is how will we relate uh, to groups who go in a different direction. So you've got this group that has the female evangelist. Will we still respect them, or will we make that an issue of fellowship? No, we're not going to really associate with you. And because I remember I told people it's coming, and I don't know when it'll be, but we will have women. Um, it's not like we're going to maintain the complementarian position unilaterally, across the board forevermore. It will change. How will we treat each other when there's a different view on that? So, where do I stand? I'm much more open-minded than I used to be 10 or 20 years ago on this. Um, it's a big topic. I've got a lot of material at my website. I've taught a lot about this on this topic. So, can I just point people to my website? But I think what's more important is if you have this view and I've got that view, Vicky, my wife, has that view, and your wife, Pam, has this view. We may have 4 different views. Can't we all still be Christians, in good standing? Some people say, no, you can't. And I
Got
think
it.
that's
Okay. So,
unfortunate.
okay. Well, I think that's a beyond the scope of this conversation, but it's an
I
interesting.
certainly hope so.
It is a big issue for sure. So,
Yeah.
going back to your travels, you're going back to the States. What's leading you back to the U.S.
Well, in part that our, our,
and where are
our,
you going?
our,
What's
because returning to Britain was just for 5 years. That was the plan. And Vicky's mother died earlier this year. We, in terms of family commitment, we still have lots of family in UK, but there's not the need. We're going back to the US and particularly the Atlanta area because of relationships. And, I thought, we'll go back to the States. I thought maybe New England. I thought about New Hampshire or Rhode Island or something, or maybe even Canada, but somewhere cooler. There's all that humidity and it's hot, which I don't care. I'm fine. But for my wife, she's British. The heat's not ideal. So why would she want to go to Britain? Because, I mean, why would she want to go to Georgia because she has so many friends there. And then we realized that her friends, in virtually every case, she's close to the woman, and I have a great relationship with the husband. And so we're friends. So this is quite unusual. Like our main seven relationships, we're, pretty much equally close as couples. So that just made a lot of sense to go back to that to the Atlanta area. So really for fellowship, for relationships.
I see. So you've got equally balanced relationships where you've got couple relationships where maybe
Yeah,
you're close to the guy and she's close to them. Okay, got that.
lots
So
of couple relationships. Yeah, that's important.
what's your plan for the next 5 to 10 years? Are you talking about retirement? What's as you look forward, what's your best guess of what you plan on doing?
Well, I've been very slowly divesting myself of different responsibilities, different components in my ministry, and trying to empower younger people and help them along the way. Because I realize, yeah, you feel this. I mean, the age difference between you and, let's say, the younger people, and right when the younger people are people who are in their 40s, you got to realize you're a lot older than you may perceive yourself to be. You may be young at heart, but we've got a duty to step back, to empower, to not to hang on to power like some dictator. And there's so many dictators in the world right now. I'm sorry, what was the question again, Rob?
What are your plans for the next 5 years?
Oh, just the plants. Yeah, we figure that we have at least another 10 years where we'll be very active physically, hopefully longer. Um, in the so many people these days are in the West are in pretty good health in their 70s. In the 80s, people are keeling over. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not assuming after age 75, I'm 66 now. I'm not assuming I'll be completely lucid. Boy, I sure hope I am. I hope I don't get dementia like my mother and her mother had it. But so I figured I had, about a decade of doing things very similar to what I'm doing now, just slowing down ever so slow, every slightly. So what we're actually doing, an idea my wife floated a couple years ago, and I didn't think much of it. And then this year we revisited it, and that was to move to a 55 plus community. So we found a community. It's not far from Atlanta, 900 homes or so, all kinds of sports, over 100 different clubs. It's on Lake Lanier. So that'll be great for us. We can go back to kayaking, which we enjoy. There's a sport called pickleball, which I had never seen before. We're signing on a house and taking possession in really just a few days. And right across the street, there's a pickleball court. I didn't even know that when I saw the house the first time. I saw it from a drone, from an aerial view. What's that? Pickleball. Anyway, these are these are not just seniors like a nursing home or old people's home. These are older people with older children who really want to stay active. And
Yeah.
so whether
So,
it's
so you're
swimming or
moving into
tennis,
like a
and
you're
I'm
moving
sorry.
into like a 55 plus like a retirement community. Is that where you're moving to?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it retirement necessarily because probably most people, if you ask them, "Are you retired?" would say, "Well, depends what you mean." But a very active kind of community, a community of a few thousand people. So
Oh,
that's
like okay,
where
a
we'll
planned
be.
community.
Yeah, and I think the opportunities for outreach will be amazing. And we get on pretty well with people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s.
Okay, so you're going back to the North River Church. You'll be a part of that church, I'm assuming.
Well, this community in Atlanta, you have, you know, around seven main groups. Now, if Atlanta's here on the more northwest of Atlanta, you have Marietta, that's where North River is. Northview is more northeast, and this is even further out. Lake Lanier would be even further northeast. So we'll certainly keep our connections with our friends in the different churches, but we would probably be much closer geographically to Northview. But
Okay.
the
Okay.
relationships among the various congregations are. It's not like you have to choose. Um,
Right. Well, Doug, thank you so much for sharing. I want to close it out by asking this question I ask almost all of my guests.
uh,
What advice would you give to a man or woman who wants to make this life count?
Advice to a brother or sister in Christ, or
Hmm.
just to a human being.
To a brother or sister in Christ, someone who's a follower of Jesus, disciple.
Um, I would say figure out what works for you in terms of meditating on God's word and prayer. And the path that's ideal for you may not be what is for someone else, but you find something, you stick to it, and you get consistent. And you never arrive. You never know enough Bible. You got to keep learning. You got to keep praying. So it's that consistency. And the other thing I would say is don't don't just follow nature or society. And we're as we age, we turn inward, but open up. Keep reaching out. The world is amazing. I mean, learning about God's world, learning about His Word, but sharing that with other people. It's not something that you should ever stop doing. I love that verse in the Psalms. Even in old age, they're verdant. They bear fruit. There's
Yes,
that.
I love that.
We want to have an impact on the world. It's not like, well, I've already had an impact sufficient, so I'll stop now. Because you do that, then you're going to slide. You're going to go backwards. And relationships are much more important than accomplishments. But you can't just say, okay, I'll just take refuge among my grandchildren. Uh,
Right.
no, and I can't tell you what to do, but I can say these principles apply to everyone. So that a rich devotional life with the Lord, and an outward focus, uh,
Right.
which will bring joy. So those would be my pearls, my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's good. I think especially when you get older, um it's you're right. I can see people kind of letting off the gas spiritually, but in your spiritual life is an area where you always have to keep growing. You have to keep really challenging yourself, and especially as you get older, even though it may be you're not doing your secular work or your paycheck may be different, but I agree with you. You've got to maintain it or else you'll lose
I know
what
you
you've gained.
understand that, Rob, and it's something I admire about you. I don't think you're ever going to lose that drive, that passion.
Thank you. I hope not. Thank you very much. I appreciate that coming from you, Doug. Doug,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time and all the best to you and Vicky going back to the States. And thank you for your work, for inspiring me, for helping me to become a teacher in the first place, to go back and get my master's in the early 2000s. You were a huge inspiration to me for the challenge to really put the work in. And I think that really helped me. I think when I got my master's, the best thing that I learned, of course, it deepened my walk with God for sure, but it also gave me the confidence. Hey, I could write a book after writing all these papers. Essentially, these papers are 20-page chapters that I could just compile and make a book. And I thought, that's like I wrote a book right here. I could write a book. And guess what? I ended up writing some more books. But I think your inspiration and your groundbreaking work, especially in our family churches, really opened a path for many people. And so I just want to commend you. Thank you. And all the best to you going forward.
That's very encouraging. Thank you for your words.
Thanks for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First, subscribe below and let your friends know about the podcast. Secondly, read my latest book and please review it on Amazon. It's called The 10X Christian. You can find that on robskinner.com or amazon.com because my goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.